Welcome back. Matrics are currently writing preliminary exams. It's a stressful time, but it doesn't end there. Soon the stress of sourcing funding for further studies will begin.
But it turns out many are not aware of the thousands of bursaries available in various fields. So let's find out more from social investment expert Shamiso Chideme. Shamiso, thank you so much for your time this morning. A very good morning to you. You know, as we're having this conversation, it takes us back to our time when we were in Matric, right? Where even access to the bursaries that were available, many of us got to find out about them when we were in first year already, right? And not necessarily building up to the time that you finished Matric. Just take us through exactly around where is it that we're finding the gaps in access to information for these learners so they can be better prepared for what's going to be happening post-Matric?
Yeah, so there's a lot of bursaries that are being offered, as I mentioned. You know, the two popular ones that we're working with within Chikululu are, you know, your Netflix. So Netflix is committed to supporting Black representation in the film and TV industry in South Africa. And we have Anglo-American Platinum, who's driving, you know, bursary management, which is in alignment with their group sustainable mining plan. So I think both initiatives have really tried to kind of advertise. I think we've all noticed that obviously you can't always advertise online because others don't have access to data. So they've tried to obviously put posters on the ground, to distribute them to schools, and to just almost spread the word around, you know, there are bursary opportunities, you know, being offered around. But obviously, you know, it's targeting rural communities, you know, so it's not, you have to make sure that you're very intentional to make sure that people within rural communities who need access to bursaries are able to access them. Obviously at a data-free, cost-free kind of approach, because some don't have enough data to obviously do the online application. But, you know, with for example, the Anglo-American Platinum Bursary, there was an access where you just download the application form, you fill it in, and then you email it, you know, so just coming up with, you know, cost-effective modes of, you know, communicating that, you know, there are bursaries available, and obviously cost-effective modes of, you know, students and learners being able to apply for bursaries. You know, obviously others won't be able to afford data. So just factoring those kind of things when doing that.
Shamiso, just to labor on that point of accessibility to this information, you know, you would imagine that these companies that are offering these bursaries would perhaps think of actually physically going to the school and not relying on perhaps handing out flyers, or again, because you know that in rural areas these kids do not have access to data and to the internet, you are actually going into the schools. And on top of that, it should not necessarily be an initiative that is happening from Matric. I think you would imagine that a lot of learners, you know, who are excelling in grade 11 are already starting to think about the tertiary institution they want to go to. So would that also not be a good idea to start doing this from grade 11 level and to actually get into the schools?
Yes, I think the biggest access point is schools. I mean, a lot of people can go to schools to kind of inquire. And also, you're also looking for that entry level, you know, people who've just finished Matric and, you know, who are trying to integrate into higher education institutions, who might not know, you know, how to.
All right, we seem to have lost the signal a little bit there, Shamiso. We'll try to establish a better connection. A very important conversation that we're having this morning. If you've just joined us here on the South African Morning, we're speaking here about the accessibility of bursaries, as well as some kind of financial assistance for those that are in Matric and that will be obviously going from post-Matric. And a very valid question regarding exactly how is it. And I come from a space where we used to have career days, right, in school. Remember career days where you'd actually have, number one, universities, but also certain institutions actually come to the school so that they can, you know, tell you a little bit about the opportunities that are available. What is sad, though, is that I wonder if there's continuation and consistency amongst that. I do understand that we have managed to establish a bit of a better signal, Shamiso, just to help us elaborate there from Morena's question around, you know, how do we start making sure that these institutions, right, these who need these kinds of graduates eventually are able to enter into the schools?
Yeah, I think communications, how we do our communication strategies is very important. You know, actually being intentional about our target audience, right? Looking at, you know, youth unemployment and kids are just idle within their communities. They're doing nothing. They don't have access to data. And I think it's one of those things that social investors need to be very intentional about. How do we communicate this message? It's not about just posting it online. And also, it's not only about targeting your high performers. So I always mention that, there are people, students who were not necessarily top of their class, but they've worked hard and they've passed just enough for them to be able to qualify into higher education institutions, but they aren't able to tap into bursaries. And, with NSFAS funding, it's very limited in the sense that, not everybody can get it. It's obviously if you are an early bird and you're basically lucky to secure it, but there is another larger percentage that's not able to access NSFAS funding. And also, just not only looking at your critical skills. So a lot of bursaries do want to target, your critical skills, but what about the Boilermakers in TVET colleges that also, qualified enough to get a diploma? So it's also just being intentional about who is your target audience, looking at youth unemployment, looking at, we have a high percentage of youth that are idle, but they do qualify to get into institutions, might not necessarily have secured NSFAS. Most bursary initiatives, the requirements are very high. Maybe sometimes they might not be able to, qualify. They might have just passed just enough to move on to the next level. But obviously everybody else is applying. There are thousands and thousands of applications that come through. So it's almost just creating a pathway for even students that are, wanting to get into TVET colleges, not only the formal university institutions as well. And being intentional about, if you're targeting rural, vulnerable backgrounds, if they don't have access to data, then how are you going to intentionally target them to make sure that, the right students actually secure bursaries?
Now, Shamiso, I want to go back to the point of being intentional about who you're targeting for the bursaries, but specifically, what about that Boilermaker in a TVET college? What about that electrician? What about that, what about that ordinary artisan a job? Could it be said that Anglo-American, Netflix, Investec, such corporations are going after their next CEO, their next actuary? That's why they are specifically perhaps targeting certain people and not going into the rural areas to go for that guy who just got enough to get a diploma and can actually, build a wall. They're not looking for those kinds of what many would seem as low jobs, one of those jobs that are really just, not top. They're not the guy in the corner office with a beautiful suit. Could that be the reason why some of these corporates are not going for those particular targets, Boilermakers?
Yeah, but if you look at the Anglo-American Platinum Bursary, it's actually targeting those. So they have opened up, the way that they do their bursary management, So the standard offering about Platinum, for example, that it fills a gap, like I'd mentioned, that they were not looking for top performers to be part of their bursary management. They were actually looking for those students that worked hard and passed, well enough to enter into higher education institutions. They were looking for your vulnerable group. They were very intentional about going into the communities, informing the traditional leaders about, we're looking for those cohorts of children that don't have access. And obviously, with Platinum, they've even gone beyond to kind of say that, okay, we need a holistic bursary management. It's not only about, tuition. It's about tuition, accommodation, stipends, offering them laptops, and psychosocial support. So psychosocial support is a very critical element for people who come from vulnerable backgrounds, or rural backgrounds, because they really do struggle to integrate into into higher education institutions. It's a culture shock for them. And, just providing, psychosocial support, which is not only about the clinical psychological element, it's just preparing students to be able to integrate into higher education institutions. It's making them work ready, because remember, at the end of the day, they need to be able to access economic opportunities. So I think with Platinum, they've kind of looked beyond, the now that, okay, we just need someone to secure a bursary, but now they're thinking towards how do we make them access economic opportunities? How do we help them to integrate into the economy after they finish, higher education institutions? And same thing with Platinum, the creative arts space. With Netflix, there are not a lot of funding opportunities, for creative arts in general. It's not a very, a lot of people don't tap into that space. And, Black representation in that space is also quite low. And, Netflix targeting that is also kind of amazing. And also looking at, the same spectrum as what Platinum is doing, that, looking for people within your vulnerable backgrounds. And they've opened it up to the whole spectrum of youth, 18 to 35. And, just ensuring that, they have all the necessities required. And I think if all corporates could kind of head to that direction of, full end service, targeting the people in most need, the people that are idle, because those are the people, obviously, that then obviously we're setting them up for failures, because they are supposed to be, our future leaders in the future,
Yeah.